So I've been thinking a lot about this concept of infinite games. And there's a author and motivational speaker, Simon Sinek, who actually wrote an entire book on the subject. I'm not gonna recommend the book unless you're like one of those who enjoys listening to motivational speakers like Tony Robbins or John Maxwell or Stephen Covey. If you are interested in those types and you have not heard of Simon Sinek, I would highly recommend that you look him up, because the fact that you would have read books or listened to speeches by John Maxwell or Tony Robbins or Stephen Covey, and Simon Sinek has not popped on your radar, that's impressive. It means you probably disconnected from the internet sometime before 2008. But just to give you a brief background on Simon Sinek, he did a TED Talk around 2008, and it broke the internet. It was a really simple idea. He drew 3 circles on a whiteboard, and the outer layer of the circle is what somebody does. We'll use me as an example. So what I do, I build software. I'm a computer programmer. That's what I do. And then he would do inner circle inside that. So like the second ring in would be like how you do it. And going off the example of me, I would use a specific tech stack. Maybe it's Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. As an example, I use web technologies, and then, how could be like I write my code in a certain way. I use specific design principles when coding, that kind of stuff. And then the why was at the very core, and his point during this TED Talk was the why we do something is so much more important and so much more valuable to share with people than what we do or how we do it. And it was a very profound idea, because many people, they know what they do and they know how they do it, but they don't know why they do it. It's at least difficult to articulate with language, because a lot of times why we do something isn't explainable with words. A lot of times why we do something is tied to a feeling, and we do our best to justify that feeling with words. Like, why do you drive a certain car? It makes me feel safe. Why do you drive that car? It makes me feel cool. And that's usually the best we can do. But his point during that TED Talk in 2008 was really simple. If companies could distill why they do what they do into language, that could be the cornerstone of their marketing. They would be able to sell more products and be more successful, and they would transcend from a company that does okay to a company that has a loyal following. And he has a lot of case studies behind this idea. There are companies out there that do have a following. A few of the companies he references, he starts with Apple. Especially in 2008, Apple had a very cult-like following. Even to this day, somebody will always buy an iPhone over an Android. Back then, in 2008 at least, iPhones were multiple times more expensive than competing smartphones, and Apple had to justify that markup. And they were really good at explaining why they do something. They had a core belief. They were the rebels. They were the ones who were rattling the cage. They were against Big Brother. Now, they are Big Brother, but people will still stick with them because of their core belief in privacy. Other smartphones have no issue with selling your data to the highest bidder, but Apple devices, and at least their apps within their ecosystem, like obviously if you download Google, onto an iPhone, you're cooked. But at least Apple, with its hardware and its software ecosystem, will not share your data outside of Apple. And that's something the users really do, because we all know that we confide our deepest, darkest secrets into these devices, so knowing how that information is used is important from just a practical and sense. And it could, nobody really wants their diary exposed to the whole world. Point of all that was to introduce you to the idea of Simon Sinek so that you wouldn't have to look him up. So you have a general idea of who he was. He did TED Talks when TED Talks were cool. He used his TED Talk to reach a wider audience, and it worked. He sold a lot of books, he gave a lot of speeches. Companies hired him and paid him a decent chunk of change to give the same TED Talk that he gave at TED to their private company and apply it to their specific company and motivate their employees and make the leaders of the company feel good. And it worked. And I do like Simon Sinek a lot. I know he gets a lot of criticism on the internet now. I think anybody who gets really successful is going to be subject to some level of criticism. But I do believe in the core ideas that he preaches. I do think he's trying to put positive vibes back into the world, and right now the world could use a little bit of that. I generally like his feel-good messages. Of course, feel-good speeches only go so far. Things actually have to change. But that's a topic for another video. So anyway, I was thinking about his latest book, The Infinite Game. I read through it, I actually listened to the audiobook, but I got through the whole book. It was really similar to his other books. He has a very particular format of using companies as case studies. But this idea of infinite games and finite games stuck with me. And it's an interesting topic that I don't think enough people are talking about, and so I just want to add to that space. I know the book came out a while ago. I read the book a while ago. The concept of the book is pretty simple. He talks about finite games as a starting point, and so when you think of a finite game has a beginning and an end. He uses sports a lot as for his examples, so if you look at baseball as a finite game, it starts at a certain time, both teams play for 9 innings, and then the game ends. Whoever has the higher score wins. And sometimes it can go into extra innings if the game is tied, but the amount of innings will always be a finite number. It's not infinite. So in a finite game like baseball, the game ends, but the players persist beyond the game. After the game, the players go home. They either celebrate with their families or party with their friends, or if they lost, they sulk alone. But they persist long after the game is done. So in an infinite game, the reverse is true. In an infinite game, the game perpetuates and continues long after players join and drop out. In his book, he uses business as an example of an infinite game because new businesses start every day. Businesses declare bankruptcy every day. But the game of business, or even more broadly, the game of capitalism, continues regardless. We can point to a lot of other things and call them games. And I think that by itself is an interesting philosophy, and that might be the real gold nugget in the book, is just this philosophy of looking at life as games. And it's not something that he really focuses on, but it's something that I do want to focus on a bit more, at least for a moment. So what's cool about... So as adults, we have to do a lot of really boring, terrible things. For example, and as kids too, we have to do these things. But as adults, really no one's telling us to do them, but we have to do them anyway. I think that's really the only difference. In life, we have to do difficult things. Go see the doctor, or if we're older and we have more responsibility, we might have to pay rent or mortgage, or we might have to have family responsibilities. whether it's looking after our children or being a caretaker for an elderly relative. So in life, there's a lot of things that we have to deal with. And if we approach it from that mindset of, oh, this is something I have to deal with today, life can feel really hard. But when we take a step back and we change our viewpoint on that and we say, hey, what if I approach this as a game? Then that kind of lightens the mood of the thing that we have to do. For example, no matter what, you're probably going to have to see the doctor sooner or later. And you're going to have to deal with, if you're in America, you're going to deal with privatized health insurance. And you're going to have to deal with the pharmacy, potentially, if your doctor gives you any pills. And you could look at these as a series of begrudging tasks that you just have to do and they suck and they're terrible. That's valid, because they aren't exactly things that you chose to do. They're things that you're doing as a reaction of you being sick. So they do feel like they're thrust upon you. Oh, I gotta do these things, I gotta do these things. But if you shift your mindset and you say, yeah, I have to do these things, but I can approach it as a game, you trick yourself into making it more fun than it should be. And it almost feels criminal, like how different life can be when you look at it through that lens. So, going back to my example of going to the doctor, healthcare is an infinite game. Healthcare is an infinite game. You have players in this game, and the game will persist long after the players drop in or drop out. So, if you think about the players, there's you're the patient in most cases. Unless you're working in healthcare, then you have a different role, but sometimes you'll be a patient. And then you have doctors, you have nurses, all of the medical staff. You have the insurance company and all of the roles within the insurance company. So the insurance broker, they play a role in this game. And then you have the pharmacy. The pharmacy plays a role in the game. And so it's this really well orchestrated, carefully calibrated game with really precise rules. And half of the game is just learning the rules. So knowing your insurance plan to the letter gives you a big leg up on this game. And it allows you to play it better versus being like, oh, it's 30-page document. I don't want to read that. And then you're like in reactive mode or in fear mode whenever a letter comes in from your insurance company, because you don't even know what the terms of your own plan are. You don't know what they're going to charge you, this, that, and the other thing. So, knowing the rules of that game can make the game more engaging. Shifting your perspective on the game, this is something I have to do, versus how could I gamify this? How could I make this more fun? And this is just one example, right? This is just healthcare. If we were to take this to the logical extreme, we could apply it to almost all areas of our life. There are some areas of our life where maybe applying it could be inappropriate. If we lose somebody, obviously we shouldn't have a silly, playful attitude. We should take that very seriously. But in general, there are a lot of mundane things that we don't look forward to, that if we had a different perspective, if we could say, hey, what if this was a fun game I could play? Or, I have 10 errands to do today. Why don't I make this sort of like a contest, see if I can do them all within an hour? Little things like that could make life feel less miserable and boring, and it could make life a little bit more fun from day to day. If you're still in school and doing homework, hey, I wonder how quickly I can finish this homework assignment. Or just engage with the homework assignment. Actually pretend it's a fun game and get into it. Put your best into it. And on that tangent, like school is a game, isn't it? You do get graded, so there is a scoreboard. There are obstacles. Sometimes, there's sucking up to the teacher, and sometimes there's going to the principal, and the whole academic thing could be considered a game. Zooming out a little bit, politics is another infinite game, like healthcare. Politics has clear players and clear rules. At least in America, the political structure that was decided upon when this country was founded are effectively the rules of the political game. And when you zoom out to a 10,000-foot view, the political game, at least in America, is just red versus blue. I know it's an oversimplification, and like in other infinite games, politics existed 1,000 years ago. It'll exist 1,000 years from today. As long as there's humans walking around the earth, politics will be an infinite game. It will persist. It's persisted long before you and me were here, and it will persist long after you and me are gone. Politics is an infinite game because players can drop into the game, and then players can fall out of the game, but the game carries on with or without them. So that's the general idea of infinite games. Those are some pretty big examples.